voice you're hearing here now is Paul Verhoeven, the director of Starship Troopers.
And this is Ed Neumeyer, the writer of Starship Troopers.
And we are here in the middle of controversy immediately. It's interesting, I'm quoting here an article of Richard Schickel in Time magazine, who said that maybe it's saying that war inevitably makes fascists of us all. Then, of course, he says that the best guess that the filmmakers didn't think about anything like that at all because they were only concerned about special effects. But I can tell you that the movie is, in fact, in our opinion, stating that war makes fascists of us all.
That's true. That was the theme. And this opening was modeled on the Why We Fight films of World War II. In fact, this whole movie is modeled on propaganda films made during the World War II.
Yeah, they're propaganda films from the American propaganda films. And of course, there is also clearly a disguised statement about propaganda films of the Third Reich. In fact, it is saying, of course, that this fascist propaganda that is kind of apparent in the movie should be really read, at least that's how we meant it, should be read as something that is not good. So whenever you see something that you think is fascist, you should know that the makers coincide with your opinion, thinking that it is not good. That is not a good statement, and this is not good politics. And if you see a black uniform, you should also know bad, bad, bad. You know, it's very simple. You should not read it differently than that. We all agree with that. It's bad. If you see Carl later in a black uniform, and when he makes certain statements, and we'll come back to that later, then you know that it's about bad.
Yeah, when I was growing up, it was always these films, these kind of action-adventure films, were always called fascist. I remember a lot of my really liberal friends always used to tell me that RoboCop was a fascist film. So I thought we should just like kind of go out and out and sort of make a film that was essentially a fascist action-adventure film. And so that's what we've done.
Yeah, but I would see it a bit more nuanced because I feel that we are certainly stating in the movie that we disagree with some of the premises that are said here. Anyhow, we're back into the movie here, I think, and we'll leave the politics for some time. We can leave that alone.
Although this is the biggest political statement in the film.
Right, okay, let's forget about it. You go ahead here.
Well, this is just showing how the society is completely sort of oriented towards its political stuff, and they teach it in the schools, and it's actually kind of a society that works pretty well. There's no sexism, there's no racism. Later we will see that there's very little crime. In fact, they seem to have achieved the ideal sort of politically correct society, except that we sort of question how they've achieved it, and they have achieved it.
Yeah, because the most important political statement that is in this scene is Redzak saying, more or less at the point where we are now, where he says that violence is the supreme authority that solves everything, which is of course questioned by Dizzy, but then of course not accepted by him. You could of course say that this kind of statements are not so much going back to the Third Reich, I would say. There are much more statements about American politics. I mean, the whole movie is about the United States. All statements are about the United States. It's not, or any superpower for that sake. You know, you could say as well for Russia 10 years ago, or perhaps for China in the future, or for Germany in the past. But it's certainly also talking about American politics now. And so it is really saying that as we have perceived, of course, in the last 20, 30 years, that there is a tendency in American politics that if people disagree, that we would use power and violence. I mean, very apparent now in the conflict with Iraq, but also clear in any conflict in the Middle East, especially, of course, the overthrow from the Iran government before the Shah, there's multiple examples, of course, if it's Panama or if it's Vietnam. It's just the idea that power and violence is always used at a certain moment when things take too much time to solve in a more democratic way. And I think that is what the movie, the political statements of the movie are about. I mean, that's my opinion, but that's how I read the script. I mean, but here's the writer. He can tell me that it's not true. It's not about American politics. American politics are always benevolent.
Well, when we saved your ass in World War II, that's absolutely true. But, no, of
Yeah,
course.
but we're not talking about World War II. We're talking that's the problem. It's
No, of
not
course.
about World War II. I think the statements are much more about everything that happened after World War II, basically, which have to do with as well with Panama, Grenada, or even subversively in Nicaragua. It's really making statements about American social and political life.
Or you're saying all through human history. And right now, America seems to be the one at bat. But all through human history, the powerful write history, and the powerful decide how things are going to be done,
Now
and
let's-
usually through violence.
Now it's interesting. Just perhaps we should just look at that little scene here where Carl just teased Johnny. Carl, of course, is the person that seems to be a pretty nice guy, but ultimately develops to a kind of a proto-fascist, if you want so. And it's interesting that in this scene, Carl's character is already established because he already uses basically his technological knowledge to humiliate Johnny, to make him, let's say, put him in his place, and he uses already. He's already less concerned about human values and how to treat people than he is about his own idea of how the world should be led or whatever, you know. So there's already a character aspect here, I think, of Carl, where what tells you that you have to be careful and that this guy, you should be cautious about Carl, that he might be doing things that are not so likable as he did just in that scene. Now here in this scene, basically, there's no politics at all. This is just big, ugly bugs, basically, on the table. And I think it was just a scene that we brought in, or that we kept in, or that Ed wrote in, just to keep the interest in the insects going. So that it's like in the birds, isn't it, where you have little little incidents throughout the first part of the movie before the big attack of the birds start, but that always seem to tell you they are there, they will be coming, and this is one of the scenes that you won't forget. This movie ultimately is not about politics, but it's about giant insects.
Yeah, I think this scene helps you sort of immediately establish, without any more question, that there are giant bugs in the universe. After this scene, you don't question it anymore. Perhaps you don't question it after the action open, but I felt like you had to get it over with pretty quickly that we have bugs here, and I think it's kind of interesting that we don't explain it more than that. And one thing that people never noticed was the Rue McClanahan character here, the teacher who is scarred and blinded. Seems that all the adults in this world are scarred and blinded.
Well, they all come from let's say, from bug wars, basically. They have all been fighting for the Federation and basically have been mutilated because of that, isn't
But
it?
maybe that's just what happens to, maybe that's the metaphor for growing up. Maybe that's what happens to all adults. Because these kids are all sort of wonderful and beautiful now that they're, and innocent. But as the course of the story goes on, they too will be scarred in various ways.
The scene basically here at the moment we are talking about this so-called telepathy that is supposed to be existing, at least in this world, and is used later in the movie as we find out that Carl is gifted enough to read the brain bug's mind and also to give Johnny information about where Carmen is in a telepathic way. This is a scene, of course, based on the experiments that were done by the parapsychologist Rhine in the 50s and 60s that seemed to be at that time very much proving that something like telepathy was there in a statistical way, although experiments later are a bit more unclear about that, and it's still pretty much an unproven fact if telepathy is something that really occurs or not. I mean, I don't know either, you know. Sometimes you would like it to be that way because then there seems to be something beyond human consciousness, but it's doubtful if it exists, really.
But in a movie it can exist, and it's sort of, wouldn't it be fun if you were psychic?
Well, in fact, I think a lot of people believe that it exists, you know, as they believe that astrology and all these things exist. Of course, none of that is true, of course. It's all just something we want to
We'd like to believe because it would explain a lot of things.
Yeah, that makes life a little
And
bit
make life
more
easier.
meaningful, isn't it?
Right. And this is our football scene, our football of the future.
Yeah, I don't think we changed it a little bit by putting it indoors, I would say, and by adding this athletic situation to it, isn't it? It's a combination of of let's say
gymnastics and
Yeah.
and arena football. Actually, some credit must go to Alan Marshall, who, although he's British, is an expert on American football, and he helped design this game and did a good job of it. Now, this scene is where we get all the complications. Here's the hero's opponent, and here's the girl who now has two guys to choose between.
Yeah, and we portrayed her as a girl that might like two guys, which in some way seems to be difficult for audiences in general. I mean, a girl probably should only like one guy, but that's not the case here. She likes two guys.
We thought she was the girl who could have everything and had to choose as she grew up. Yeah, but it's true. She was hated for the fact that she liked two guys.
Even to a degree that there were two little scenes that are somewhere else on this special edition that we took out of the movie because the audience, when being really confronted with the fact that she would be able and willing to kiss not only Johnny but also Xander, got really into an uproar when we had special screenings. But we might come back to that later. Anyhow. I mean, here it's certainly the four people, Dizzy, Johnny, Carmen, and Xander, are, I'd say, in a very nice way, through the football game, I mean, are established in their different relationships in the very beginning of the movie. Dizzy, of course, being the girl that wants Johnny, Carmen, the girl that wants her career, Johnny wants Carmen, and Xander wants, Xander really wants probably Carmen. That's probably what it is.
Yeah, it's funny how these things happen in life, of course, but in the movies, you can't get away with that. You're not supposed to like two people. And look at that look. That's where you tell the audience, uh-oh, watch out for that girl.
We all like that girl, of course, but we are a minority, perhaps.
Mom, don't get mushy.
So Johnny here is, this is his parents' house. This is a location a little bit outside to the north of Los Angeles. The house is real. It's not a studio. It's just a house we found there, and that's where we shot it, basically, so on location. Most of the stuff you saw before was location, in fact. I mean, with the exception of the classroom that was in the studio. But the school, the outside of the school, is Kaiser Permanente, which is one of the hospital chains and a building also in Los Angeles.
This scene is about how if you're rich in this world, you don't have to be a citizen, which comes straight from Heinlein's book. And I think it's kind of an interesting thing he proposes there, that the wealthy don't have to be citizens, that you only, and sort of proposes that the blue-collar class or the labor class is actually more respected than the merchant class.
Yeah, which has been interpreted by people as a fascist situation, especially when I showed the movie in Germany, but in fact it's much more what you would say a communist situation than fascist, really.
Well, it's interesting how these things all blur.
On the other hand, people that are not a member of the party and that are a communist or whatever you want to call it, but like the parents, they are not persecuted, isn't it?
No,
nobody puts them in a concentration camp. It seems to be an accepted situation, so it's kind of benevolent in that way that even if you disagree with the general ideas, that you are still allowed to be alive and to do whatever you want to do. Only you cannot vote.
And here's the school prom, wherein
the song that you're hearing at the moment that is done by and composed by Zoe Polydouris, who is the daughter of Basil Polydouris, who composed the music, the film music. And
you'll see her pretty soon. We point her out.
When it goes from after the scene with Red Check, you will see her. You will see her on stage. That is Zoe. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. But the second song that you will be hearing is a David Bowie song, where we changed the words. It's from. It's a song called Oxford Town or something like that.
I've never been to Oxford Town.
Yeah.
And he let us change the words. And it's actually the only sort of sense of a date we put on the picture. because the lyric is talking about the end of the 23rd century.
Right.
Hey, better hurry up if you want to catch him.
You're the best.
I don't know what to...
I don't know much to say here either, except that here's...
Well, again, Carl is always the person that seems to be not really completely reliable, Carl, in my opinion, because he tries to kiss Carmen first in the other scene in the courtyard, and here, of the moment that Johnny leaves, he goes to Dizzy. He seemed, I mean, we're trying to give him a certain kind of a darkness that later, of course, translates in him becoming really...
Yeah, Neil Patrick Harris always thought of the character in this part of the movie as the sort of the class clown. And I think, in not a bad way, that's sort of was Neil's role, too, in life. He's a very smart guy, and I think a lot of him comes through in these scenes.
Yeah, in the next scene, when Johnny walks away here, you see again a full shot of this, again, the Kaiser Permanente building, which we translated, made to a high school, and the singers there. This is Zoe there on the left side. That is the daughter of Basil. It's her first performance, I think, in a movie. And here again, we go back to the situation with the four people.
Now, doesn't she look guilty there? I think that.
Well, because she's a flirt. She's always seeing what is the best way to do it, you know. And
of course, we've never known any women like that.
Huh?
I've said we've never known any women like that.
Or men, you know. I mean, men are exactly the same, of course, but that's much more tolerated
But there were people
done by
who
men
actually
than by women.
wanted her to die in this movie because of what she did here, and it's true. We don't ever ask. Johnny has 2 girls, and we don't think he should die.
Are you jealous?
I mean, this upcoming is a shot that I really like. That is when they kiss, and then we see that's separated by Carl. We put his hands in between them. And then we see that Dizzy in the background, which is one of my favorite shots. How the whole situation between the 3 of them is re-established, and that's basically what it is about. That's who wants what, you know.
This is where we find out that the price of sex is to join the military.
Yeah, when he says that he wants to become part of the mobile infantry, she gives him as a reward. My father is not at home, Johnny. And look, I mean, he's happy, you know. He's going to die for her. He's going into the military, and he will be
and this is
happy.
Sort of the biological paradigm here, is that you have to die
listen
for
to
sex.
the song. Listen also to the song. It's saying, all is fine, all is fine, all is fine. Of course, everything is going to be really bad, and most of them are going to die anyhow.
This is the kind of the last moment of innocence in the movie, isn't it?
So basically, that really tells you all is fine in a way, with the symbol of the eagle there, representing, of course, mostly destiny and death, if you want to...
Everybody made a big deal about that eagle, saying that that was a fascist symbol, but in fact, it's a Navajo eagle. And we have an eagle on the back of most of our money in this country. And the Romans had an eagle.
Yeah.
So it just seems to be the symbol of whoever's in power has an eagle.
Well, especially when you compare the Roman Empire to the American Empire, there's a lot of similarities in it, in its display of power and trying or feeling an obligation to bring peace to the world, even if you don't want it, you know, or even if you have a different opinion. I mean, the peace should be there anyhow, which is the Pax Romana is kind of the Pax Americana.
Well, some people speak highly of the Pax Romana. You don't think we should have a Pax Americana?
But not, for example, in Israel. They didn't. I mean, they crucified Jesus there with the Pax Romana.
Well, didn't the Romans had a lot of trouble in the Middle East too? So it's sort of nothing's changed.
No.
Now here we have more scarred adults, more symbols of what it takes to grow up. And here are the 3 friends. The last time that they are together before the war breaks out.
I'll go for that.
And it's still hopeful here. It's still sort of innocent. And Carl doesn't
Yeah,
really
you still
believe
haven't
in
seen
it.
much violence in it. What you have been seeing in the last 2 scenes, already a little bit at the prom, and in this scene, of course, much more, is the presence of the military, which will be dominating for the next 90 minutes of the movie, isn't it? But that's the last time you see in this scene where you see two civilians, even when Johnny goes into the next scene after this fight with his father. you will see, of course, that it is full of military, and slowly the movie advances into the military world, and we'll never get out of that anymore.
And here's a little sort of gender swap here, where we find out that in this world, girls like to look handsome in uniforms.
Handsome in a uniform.
Don't talk about Carmen that way.
Johnny,
And Johnny's pretty callow and doesn't listen to his parents, which is sort
This
of a
was
staple of
this is
teenage movies.
the, how do you call that thing
The
here?
convention center in downtown
Yeah.
Los Angeles.
And most of it is real. There are a couple of columns we added there. And later when Johnny goes to the transporter, all these transporter things that are behind them when they stand there and kiss, that we all built inside the convention center. But for 95%, of course, most of this is just real. I mean, this little thing that you walk up towards here, of course, is something that we added. But it's really rare that you see additional things in the scene.
I think the biggest battle of this day was the costumes. That's what I remember of this.
Yeah, we had to. We got costumes that seemed to be too colorful, isn't it? And
No,
when we
they're
came
also
to the
white.
set-
There were white costumes that you wanted out.
Of course, you
because
will
didn't
see.
like white.
And we never talked about it, but at school and everything you saw before, there is a very conventional dress code. In fact, school has a real dress code,
Sort of a
like,
uniform,
Clinton
perhaps.
is asking for already for some time, and we thought we should provide that here. But it's and when you go to the prom, of course, with the black tie and everything, is an extremely conventional dressing. And I think this color scheme of most of these scenes is very limited. You know, there has only a couple of colors and they're all kind of pastelish. The elements you see behind them are transporters that we built onto the set of the convention center, and the image that you see now of Carmen disappearing is done by Peter Coren. This is a real part, but the corridor you see there is digital, and so he put them together in a certain way and moved that little image of her inside the corridor. This, I think, little item is kind of socio-political. It's about gun control. It's just kind of a hyperbole in telling that young kids should have guns and should be very happy with that.
That violence will make for a better society, or
Right.
that force will make for a better society.
And the same applies, the same kind of thing applies to this, where it's about justice. This is the writer, in fact. This is Ed Neumeyer.
Yeah, this was. I wanted to make sure that people didn't think I was for capital punishment, but nonetheless,
It just says basically that that there is very swift justice in this society, which of course is a political situation in the United States, as in the last 10 years
Yeah, this
there
was
have been in speeding up and getting people much faster from death row into the
from trial to execution. Yes, this was a big joke in Texas and Missouri and Kansas. They like that. And here we have another reminder that there are bugs in this world.
That's one of the, and the other thing is very interesting. The rest of the scene very interesting because this is a matte painting by Mark Sullivan. Only the people are real. But what it says, of course, in this scene is that the war was not started by the bugs. Like, that's a very interesting political situation, because in politics in general, especially in American politics, there's a tendency, of course, to take a part of history, but not acknowledge what happened before. If you read stories about Iran, for example, you always hear about, of course, about the hostages that were taken in Tehran, but you rarely do you hear about the terrorist regime of the Shah. Isn't it? So history starts for example, at the terrorist taking the embassy, which is a bad situation too. But the other bad situation that was caused by the CIA, of course, putting the Shah in power in Tehran, and then having the Shah do the most awful things, that part of history is always not acknowledged. And that's basically what this is about, that little item we just saw. It's about... In the beginning of the movie, you'd think that basically the bugs attack, and the bugs are bad, and the bugs have to be destroyed. It says, Clandato has to be destroyed. Isn't it? That's what the first item of the movie says, the first fatnet. But now, later, you find out that there's only part of history. Because the real history started with the Mormon extremists setting up a colony in a territory that they were not asked to come into, which is the Clandato, let's say, the Arachnid territory. And then and basically after they retaliate, and they retaliate by killing the Mormons, but also by sending a meteor to Buenos Aires, as we see later in the movie, then we get really pissed off and forget about all that and say, oh, look at that meteor, how bad, we have to attack. And that's, I think, is the politics of the movie, isn't it?
Yes, and oddly enough, the Mormon settlers being killed was very, very popular in Salt Lake City, which you wouldn't expect. It being
No, they laughed a lot about that.
Yeah. Shows the Mormons have a sense of humor.
So here we're back in boot camp. This is also a thing that we built in
Fountain Valley.
Huh?
Fountain Valley.
Yes. And so all the tents and all that stuff we added. It was just an old airstrip, isn't it? From some
probably from World War II.
yeah, some airport that was not used anymore, and we built it. So basically, when you see where they're standing on, that's still part of the old airstrip. And but all the tents and everything else is built, or it was built by
We see
Alan
how,
Cameron, the
right.
production designer.
This is Clancy Brown as Sergeant Zim, and Dina we've already met. And this is the scene where we meet all our recruits. It's very much a scene that you see in most World War II movies. The standard World War II propaganda movie starts out with a regular guy who doesn't really have much to say about his world, and then he goes into the service and he meets a lot of other regular guys, and in this case girls like him. And none of them have a particular purpose. They're just sort of, they don't even know why they're here. They might have a reason or not. But then when war breaks out, this galvanizes them, and they realize that there's something to fight for and something to die for.
And they're happy.
And this is a scene that shows that Johnny is got the leadership potential, or might be a good young fascist, because he wants Ace here to go by the rules of standing in line. Maybe a little subtle.
It's also, of course, what I think what we're doing here is this is this kind of very tough boot camp situation, isn't it? And the guy Clancy Brown is very tough and extremely. I think we exaggerated that. You know, we made it kind of to a hyperbole. That's why he breaks the arm, and later in the next scene you will see that he throws a knife into a guy's hand. It's like taking that kind of. Thing that you have seen, for example, in Stanley Kubrick's movie, of course, Full Metal Jacket, but then exaggerated into something completely, I would say, over the top.
It's sort of it pushes the cruelty, but in a way that people think is quite funny. There was a lot of laughter through this scene. So I guess in some circumstances, cruelty is a good joke.
Well, it's more, because it's also telling you the exaggeration of boot camp scenes in general, you know. But basically, we exaggerate it so much that that you might not even believe it anymore, and then it becomes kind of funny, probably. Yeah, I hope so. I mean, this is the scene we were talking about, isn't it, where he throws the knife right into his hand.
Made more possible because apparently they have the medical technology here to sort of immediately heal you if the wound isn't too bad, if you haven't been ripped in half by a giant bug or something.
When Clancy throws the knife and it gets into his hand, of course, the hand that you see there, and he puts this is his real hand when he puts it there on the wall. But ultimately, of course, clearly, when we shoot it in, then it's a false hand.
Like Kevin Yeager.
And this is, I mean, getting it in, we shot with a gun. We shoot the knife with a gun into the hand. It's a gun that's like a
pneumatic gun?
Yeah.
Air gun?
So what you have there is a false hand, and that's the knife is put into that with some extra blood. And when he takes it out, still a false hand. He holds his false hand, his other hand is behind his back.
But it's a cabled hand, because he closes it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The hand can make movements.
Yeah. Oh, and the shower scene.
It's true. About everything you have heard about the shower scene is true, because they were so... the actors were a little bit embarrassed by doing all that nudity and in front of each other, and part of the crew.
And they challenged Paul Verhoeven and the DP, Joost Vicano, to take off their clothes.
Yeah.
And it's true, they did it.
Yeah, they did it. And the challenge came from...
And then the crew, the cast said, please put your clothes back on.
I haven't heard that. I thought they would have preferred us to shoot the whole scene naked too. But basically we felt that it was not necessary. The challenge was made by Dina Meyer. We just, of course, is this kind of very nice character in the movie, but sometimes in real life has a diabolical mind. So she got us to do that.
This was something the actors were so frightened of, and it was always a cover set. A cover set meaning that if we had rain, we could go to this. And so there were false scares all through the beginning of production that they were going to shoot this. And whenever we were about to shoot this, they would go back to their rooms and do push-ups and try to get their bodies looking as good as possible. But in the end, they all did it rather well.
But when we took our clothes off, Joost and I, they were really happy, you know. And then they took all their clothes off immediately too, and then we could shoot a scene, and nobody cared about it.
And many of them have done nude scenes now, full nude scenes in movies and plays since then.
So, I mean, it's a really contribution to American film society. Isn't
But
it?
it also spoke of gender neutrality, which is something that we all want here in America, and it has been achieved here through the military, oddly enough.
I think it had something to do with with the problems that the military still has. I mean, I don't know if you read. There was a new thing in the military. A group was asked to give some advice about how to handle genders.
Oh, yes.
And the new idea is to separate them as much as possible.
Which is wrong.
Perhaps they can be in class together, but in everything else there has been really segregation as much as possible.
But wasn't it Plato who said that if you want equality, you have to exercise naked together? That's sort of our point here.
Well, basically that's what I tried to do. It was, I think, it was let's say, a bit joking about the military that is still not able to really think about gender neutrality, male and female, or even male, isn't it, in the gay perspective, which is still so much of a big problem, that people always seem to be afraid in the military, in my opinion, that people might start kissing instead of shooting, you know, which would be a really bad thing. That would be bad. That's the worst thing you can have.
Well, America, of course, is very puritanical and afraid of sex, and that's why this poor girl here gets hung in this movie, because of her wanton sexuality.
This is all background projection, these shots, isn't it? I mean, we added what you see in the background there, the stars of the tunnel, that's all added. This is a miniature. This is a digital little spaceship there. It's not the one you just saw in the beginning is real when it leaves, but everything else, and inside, of course, the inside here is real too, of course, clearly. But everything you see at the outside is a miniature. This is all a miniature and a digital spaceship. This is a digital spaceship in a real miniature, and background projection again here, stage background projection. Next thing they come out of this thing that is again a giant miniature of 10 yards, and a digital spaceship, the little one that goes there in the distance. And in the next couple of shots you see the moon there in the background. The moon was a digital moon.
This is all Scott Squires at ILM, isn't it?
Yeah, this is all done by ILM. The whole sequence is. And the spaceship that you now see through the window, that is a real model again. So
and
that was shot.
Is this ILM or is this Sony?
No, this is all ILM, this area. And then we come inside the spaceship again. The rest of the scene, whatever you would see in this scene, through the window or outside the ship, is done by ILM. Most of the spaceship scenes are done by Sony Imageworks, but this one was done by ILM. So you see through the window there, once in a while you see the moon, which means that we shot all these scenes. When you see a window, they were all shot with green screen. And later, of course, the green screen was replaced by whatever you see now in the window.
And just a little note about the readouts. They were all done by Band from the Ranch, which had to come in late and did a heck of a job getting
what you
them
see on the
done
monitors,
time,
everything what you see on the monitors, that was done by them.
And this is a scene in which we hope to show that Carmen is essentially in control of the ship and is a hotshot pilot in her own right, which again was supposed to show the sort of the gender equality in this world. In fact, that she is maybe better than Xander. And then we also have a female captain, of course.
Now, basically, she's going to take command of the ship. And then you can see here, what you see outside, the tubes are digital. What you see the ship and around the ship, that is model. Of course, the stars are a digital star field. What you can see of the buildings through the window here at the side are real models. But still, all these tube stuff, the tubes are digitally made. So they were just done in the computer and are not real. I mean, they were not done as a model. Here, most of this shot with the blue stuff of the rockets there is an added digital effect, but most of this, the two main elements, of course, are real models. Here you have, this is a green screen shot what you just saw, and here again, this is all real models. Through the window would be green screen, and everything what you saw there was added later.
Some people wondered why the company that did the videographs was called Banned from the Ranch, and it was because of several of its members, or friends of them, were banned from George Lucas's Skywalker Ranch for allegedly breaking into his office and having too much fun. So that is where Banned from the Ranch took its name from, and so it just shows you just how incestuous the special effects world is.
Now the shot you're going to see here, when they get to overdrive, space overdrive, that is done by Sony Imageworks. So that's the only shot in the scene that was done. This shot by Sony. It's all digital stuff, isn't it? The transformations and the curving of the people and of the whole cockpit was done digitally, and then this light effect was added later, of course.
This red team, blue team actually, for me, was a little bit of an homage to the Dirty Dozen, which has a big war game sequence in the middle of it, which has red team and blue team.
Only we added, they didn't have probably the laser beams there, isn't it? They were all done by Peter Koren, who also did them for Star Wars. That's where you'll probably see a certain similarity between the two of them, although I don't know you can do much different than what you see here. And we added, yeah, we tried to give also the people with the blue helmet a blue laser, and the red ones are red one. Then, of course, what you see when they shoot and you see these sparkles, that is all real, isn't it? And then the beam was added later, so so that it would fit exactly what you would see, the impact. The impact on the chest of them, when you see them hitting there and you see this sparkling thing, that was added digitally too by Peter Koren.
Now our hero gets what he most wants, which is control of the squad, or squad command. And we'll find out what kind of leader he makes here.
Well, yeah, he becomes a squad leader, and basically the line of the next couple of scenes is really that Johnny is now, let's say, has become a leader, but then throughout this, in the second part of this scene, he is informed by Carmen that she doesn't want to proceed with their romantic relationship. In fact, she wants to go career. And Johnny is really upset about that because he went into the military because of her. And now basically that the reason for his being there is kind of gone because they will never see each other anymore. And so I think that sets him up for the next scene where he makes, where he is kind of anxious and tense and
makes a mistake.
And makes a mistake that basically cost one of the other people back in his life. But that's basically, I think that's how the construction, the dramatic construction of these three scenes is. And here she tells him, okay, you know, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, right.
This was often called the Dear Johnny video. Actually, also in the book, the Dear Johnny letter appears. But interestingly, in talking to some people in the military, it's quite true that often guys do join up for girls and do end up getting this kind of a letter, this kind of a message.
In the background, of course, that was all green screen, you know, so whatever you see behind her was added later. And I think these planets you see there, which is Jupiter, is a digital planet.
Now, this might be the fatal flaw for this character, because I don't know that the audience ever forgave her for dumping the hero. And I don't know if she can ever come back from that, poor girl.
Well, I think that a lot of people felt that she shouldn't have done that, and that she should always have been faithful to Johnny, in thought at least.
Yeah, we thought this was kind of a feminist character who was strong and putting her career first, but strangely, the objections to it went across all gender and all race. Almost nobody liked the fact that she did that.
Yeah, but I like it, you know. I fully agree with her. I think she should just take career above the guy. And why not? You know, she can always come back to the guy.
Well, that was the idea, but it made me. The reaction to it made me think that sort of feminism had its day and was maybe past, at least in America. I don't know how it plays in Europe.
No, I think it's strange because I got reactions from I think it was from Thailand, where the boys boys and girls were very upset by what Carmen had done, and in fact, of course, felt that at the end of the movie the wrong girl died.
Yeah, that's what we heard
And
all again.
they hated the last 10 minutes because that's where Carmen, where Dizzy dies, and Carmen comes kind of back to Johnny without.
Yeah, so watch out, girls. Dumping a guy will soon become a
that's the other
death
side
penalty
of
offense.
other side of the world and a completely different, let's say, outlook at life. And they felt as strongly about how bad Carmen was and how wonderful Dizzy, and that the wrong girl died. And we should have reversed it and be. Perhaps from a commercial point of view, I think
maybe we should.
We might disagree, you know.
Or,
we might agree. I mean.
Or maybe we should have had Carmen grovel and everything. But we were trying to be good feminists, you know, and show that women have their own lives and should have their own careers and maybe just not in action adventure movies. But we do have a strong girl in Dizzy here, and people do like her. She's very good with a gun, and she's good on the football field. So. You know.
Again, this was all done by the laser by Peter Coran, and then the only thing that is special was done by Kevin Yeager and his group. Went up there. You go. That shot. That was the explosion of the head. Was a copy of Mackinder's head that we exploded on the set. That was done by Kevin Yeager Productions.
And that's a pretty good shocking moment. There's usually a gasp in the audience from that.
Sir, yes, sir.
And here we have the hero who knows he's done something very bad and is probably shaken and thinking about quitting or thinking about what he's done. But in this world, you have a chance. Sometimes you're given a second chance if you're willing to take your punishment like a man. And that's shortly here we will see Johnny doing that.
In the meantime, this scene was shot in the studio, and whatever you see on the outside was reconstructed in the studio. Nothing sensational, but it seemed to be an easier way to doing it.
Yeah, well, this was during the big rainstorm in Wyoming.
Yeah.
So we were actually in a warehouse in Casper, Wyoming. This isn't.
This is real. This is
real.
the only real shot of the scene that was shot on the camp that we have seen in before, isn't it? On the airfield camp.
Yes, sir, I do.
But the rest, of course, was we were just forced into this situation. We wanted to do it in reality, you know, because it would have been nice to look through the rooms and see the whole field. But we were forced by this rain to find something because we couldn't shoot anymore during.
Actually, it was a flash flood. It knocked us
Yeah.
out of our main set, the fortress set.
So we had to
we'll see
go
later,
to cover
for 10
sets
days.
and try to keep filming. So that's why we rebuilt that in that warehouse while we were in Wyoming, what normally you would never do, of course.
Right down on this side.
Now, this is called company punishment, I believe.
It's administrative.
Oh, administrative punishment. It was Dale Dye who wanted, the military advisor wanted to call it company punishment. But as was often the case, Dale Dye did not prevail, and we went with the script, strangely.
For failure to abide by safety
This was actually a scene that was in the book Starship Troopers. This was something that they did in the society, according to Heinlein. If you did a very bad thing, they would hang you, and for everything else, they would flog you in some public way.
Yeah, there was long arguments if we would keep that scene in the movie or not, isn't it, with the studio?
The studio wasn't sure we needed this scene. I thought we
because
needed.
probably you were a bit afraid of the scene. But
I think they were
it's
afraid of
pretty
what you would
harsh,
do
isn't
with
it?
this scene, actually. But I don't know that it's so harsh.
Of course, we thought it was kind of appropriate because there have been this whipping of an American boy
in Singapore.
in Singapore, isn't it?
Right
so
when
it
we were
felt
doing
that
this.
we felt that it at least was.
And again, people in this country started saying, yeah, you know, maybe we should start flogging people or caning them for doing things like graffiti and stuff like that. So, you know, this was something that people were talking about, and we just decided to go ahead and give it to them.
This is a model shot with a starfield in the background digitally. But when we come closer, this is still model, but here is a digital transition that ultimately leads us to another real shot, which is starting about here, which is a shot in the studio with a crane moving towards our set and to Carmen there. So that was the way it was done, kind of a morphing between a model shot and a real shot.
You read my mind.
That was done by Sony Imageworks, wasn't it?
This was done by Boss Film.
Ah, that's right.
Yeah,
Boss did
that
this.
was Boss Film.
And in fact, this is the last work Boss Film did before they stopped.
yeah, right. Yeah,
So
they
Boss
don't
Film,
exist
which
anymore.
did Ghostbusters and a lot of other stuff.
Yeah,
this was their last work.
in fact, this whole scene, what we call of the asteroid grazing, has been done by Boss. That was the only scene that they did on the movie when we had some time problems to finish everything in time. We asked ILM and Boss to come in to help us out in a couple of scenes. Again, this scene is probably emphasizing Carmen's superiority in general way, which we don't know really in retrospect if that was the good way.
Maybe she should have been more
More stupid,
more
basically.
stupid, or always asking the guy what he wanted to do,
Yeah.
or maybe she could have giggled a little bit, and the audience would have liked her more.
Still, I'm very happy that we did it this way, you know, because that's how I feel about men and women in general, anyhow. This is ultimately this was leading more to nearly to a real kiss, this scene. But again, then when we screened the movie, that was one of the first enormous resistance points we felt. Although she had told Johnny that she was going for her career, and basically not even dismissing him, but telling him that basically she had something else in mind. At the point here where the two of them are close together, and this was shortened a little bit, but then you would see them moving closer together as if they wanted to kiss. And again, that was not accepted by the audience in the previews, because they felt that it was kind of that she should be faithful to Johnny till her death.
I think they felt that she was a slut. In fact, you should have seen the cards on
The
this.
cards were kill the slut.
Slut.
The slut should have died. That was on one of the cards. Or one of the cards, multiple cards at the end of the screening of the previews.
And again, these were from all walks of life, all genders, all races. Felt that she was awful for having done this thing. Essentially.
I think those are models. In the model, the meteor is a model, and the spaceship. This is a green screen with a real model in the background that was added later. Again, this is done in the same way. So everything you see is more or less real, even if you see it through the window. Although that was added later, because that was shot, of course. If you look through the window, this was shot, of course, with green screen, but then everything later was added. It's interesting that on top of that, while this scene was happening in the original version, a couple of people were sucked out and died. And then the studio felt that that the captain that is arriving here in Brandra, that the captain could never compliment the two of them after a couple of people would have been killed. But of course, in military terms, of course, was absolutely correct. She did a good job. She sacrificed something, but basically she got the most of the ship and the most of the crew through. But the studio felt that she was too that this thing that Carmen is doing now, this little smile that she's doing here, could not be there if people would have died. Well, perhaps they're right there.
I don't know,
Anyhow, we
sometimes
took
you're-
it out, and now the same shots that where people are floating out, we put in the last scene of the movie when the Roger Young is destroyed, and we used them there. And of course, everybody dies there, so it doesn't matter anymore.
You took your licks.
No, this is the scene where Johnny decides that he's had enough, joining up for the wrong reasons and all that, and he's going to leave. But something's about to happen. It will change all that, and it starts with a phone call from his parents.
That was shot. The videotape of the video image that you see there was done in reality. In contrast to the situation where Carmen has a letter to Johnny, the scene that you saw before, that was shot as a blue screen, and everything was added later. This was shot on the set. We made the tape of these two people before and just showed it to Johnny just as it is. So that's probably why the quality of the tape is much less good than what you saw with Carmen. In Carmen, the blue screen in the Carmen scene, in the Dear Johnny letter, we had to do it that way because the special effects in the shot, the planet that's behind Carmen, that all was not ready, so we had to do it with blue screen. Of course, this is a much cheaper method, of course, and we would certainly for Carmen also have used that if everything would have been ready on time to use it on the set. Of course, you need it on the set. Now it was done in post-production, so we didn't have to worry about it.
You take that stroll down Washout Lane.
And here's where we have Dizzy telling the hero that if he quits, he just doesn't have what it takes to be a citizen, which is shows that Dizzy is fully inculcated in this society and
believes in it
and believes in
apparently.
it,
Although
yeah.
she went also to Johnny because she went into the military because of Johnny mostly, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's worked on her now. She's been in the military long enough, and now she believes in it.
Yeah, and Johnny only has to lose his parents and then he believes in it too, which we will see in the next scene, because then Johnny, having lost his parents or whatever, or Buenos Aires is completely wiped off the earth, as it says so, and then Johnny decides at this time now he's motivated enough to join the military too.
Or to stay in the military because now he has an enemy.
No.
And of course, as we know, all sort of fascist nations need an enemy.
Well, not
keep
only
going.
fascist nations. I mean, couldn't you make an argument that the United States basically
Well, you keep
is always
calling us a
needing an
fascist
enemy?
nation.
Didn't Albright say lately that the new enemy was in the Middle East? Because we have lost the Cold War enemy, but now, of course, the whole NATO is already gearing up. I mean, at least you ask the NATO to gear up for the possibility of confrontations in the Near East.
No,
in the Middle
maybe
East.
maybe it's not just national stuff, Paul. Maybe it's that human beings need enemies to define their lives. That here we
But
are.
there was a fascist thinker in the 30s called Schmidt, who said basically
Schmidt is
the
a
first
German
thing a
name, by the
nation has to do to define themselves is to define the enemy. So basically, there you
Well,
go.
that's true. That's the history of people defining themselves, is by having an enemy.
Yeah, but that might be a fascist statement, which comes back to the Time magazine to say that this movie is saying if you go to war, you become a fascist.
But fascism may be part of biology.
Well, there you go. You tell that, you know. You defend that. Are you going there, you know? You say, but then basically say fascism is a natural thing and we should accept it.
We have to rise above it. That's our
Well, okay, so then we didn't succeed in that in the last, certainly not in this
or
century.
we didn't. Oh, and that's true. I thought you were talking about our film didn't succeed.
Oh, we in our film, we certainly transcended that. Of course, we are going for much better values than that. But in history of the last century, you cannot say that fascism, that we rose above fascism. Well, perhaps a little bit.
Well, we like to think so, but I think one of the things that we wanted to say with this movie is that fascism is around the corner, around every corner, so watch out. It's very easy to think that in 1945 we ended all fascism, or in 1988 when the Berlin Wall came down, but in fact, watch out, folks. The Republicans are going to be in next.
Carry on, Private.
Yes, sir.
Well, the war has come. And in this next scene here, we see the destruction of Buenos Aires.
It's a matte painting, mostly.
And
with
I like this
real
here.
foreground.
We see a human victim, which people sort of didn't react to, and maybe this guy's wife. And here Paul shows a dog, which got a big reaction. And this is the producer, John Davison.
And this shot is made by having, we shot only one row of these people and multiplied them through the shot. So that's how the audience was made. We felt we had no money really to do that, to put these couple of, these hundreds and hundreds of people there. So we only had a small amount and multiplied them 4 or 5 times, I think, to get that shot. You will see it again in the next here
Shot
again.
at Caltech.
Yeah,
actually.
so it's only one row was shot really and then multiplied all around.
And here we see Carl again the next time, and he is a little on the way to being what he will be at the end of the film.
If you look at the bars here on that shot, they are digital, like the insect. Not when we see, when you look behind Carl, but again, next shot is digital bars and digital insect.
Everyone's doing their part.
And this is the famous stomping bugs scene, which was in and out and in and out. Some people didn't think it was funny, some people didn't think we should shoot it, and I'm glad we did.
We now break net and take you live to
And this was kind of inspired, the Countdown to Victory idea was kind of inspired by the Gulf War, which was going on right as we started this project. So a lot of this Federal Net stuff is meant to evoke CNN coverage of the Gulf War.
You have to realize here that the commentator again emphasizes that the insects, the bugs, might have been provoked by the human race, and that he proposes to these kids a live and let live policy. But then, of course, Johnny, who is already completely geared up for war because of the loss of his parents and Buenos Aires, is not willing anymore to listen and say, let's kill them all. So that's, and then you get the doubtful look of the commentator telling the audience, is this basically what we want? Do we want to go to war for something that is not really something that was done towards us? We started it. We should basically not go to war. We should probably talk. And it's interesting if you read, for example, what just came out, the Kennedy tapes, which is conversations taped by Kennedy when the Cuban Missile Crisis was around. And then you hear all the chiefs of staff and all his advisors tell him, bomb Cuba, destroy everything, invade Cuba, get Castro out. And Kennedy is the only one that is kind of reasonable, says, perhaps we should talk to Khrushchev. And the others say, no, invade now. It's better today than tomorrow. And that is the whole military apparatus that is all gearing up and wanting to fight. And basically, I think that's the doubtful look that the commentator gives here to the audience. Should we? Really?
Although it's probably pretty good that we went on and did show a battle, because I think the audience for this movie also desperately wants the battle to start.
But that would mean that the audience is fascist. That you cannot presume that.
Well, but these films always evoke that in the audience, don't they?
I don't know. It's of course it plays with what you said in the beginning, that biologically fascist elements are perhaps available in the human species, and it plays perhaps with that. Yeah. So it seduces them to go for that kind of thinking, and then at the same time tells you might be wrong. You should not go to war.
Now, do you think maybe the audience didn't like that we told them that they might be fascists and that they should not enjoy this entertainment? Was that maybe a mistake?
Well, what's a mistake? I think for politically, certainly not a mistake.
Oh, no,
I
of
think
course
our
not.
statement is in my opinion, is a good one. And if commercially, perhaps people had a problem with that, yeah, but that's then too bad, like Carl says.
Boys and girls. Well, here is young men fighting over a girl. Again, the biological paradigm coming up. So maybe it's the girls cause fascism. Maybe we could say that.
Well, that might be a very correct statement. I'm glad to hear that one. Anyhow, so this was all built by us in the studio. Clearly, there is no trick stuff here. By Alan Cameron. And in the next scene, where you see the laser that was done by Peter Curran, the little beams of the laser are added digitally later to the image, that one there on the foreground.
And this is a ritual well known to many people in the military, that you get drunk and you get a tattoo, preferably after some girl has crushed your heart.
And of course, it's interesting that they all think that they're going to win and that they're going to survive. This whole sequence was shot by Sony Imageworks under the supervision of Scott Anderson. In a couple of shots you will see another shot which is very complex, because you have hundreds and hundreds of people running towards airplanes or spaceships that we call dropships. This is the shot I'm talking about. And they all multiply. There's a multiplication process. We shot two of these rows and then multiplied them as we multiplied all the spaceships. And then inside here we are clearly in a studio situation. This was built by Alan Cameron.
This actor, if he looks familiar to you, is the son of an American president, Gerald Ford's son, Jack Ford.
And here the people that you see there were added. For the rest, it is all models and matte paintings. But the people that wave with these little signs, these lights, are real, and we shot a couple of them and multiplied them again. This is mostly, of course, models. I think we had the big ship, but there is digital elements on the ship, and the little spaceships are added to that. Again, this is studio, and next shot, of course, we will see.
This,
again,
I think, is probably one of the most beautiful space shots right here.
Yeah, this
that we
one,
did.
exactly.
It's just amazing to me.
So it's multiple layers of course, the planet and the plasma fire and the models of the ships and the model of the drop ships and the star field. I think you're talking about 150 layers that are composed one on top of each other.
This is the first hint we get that the humans don't really know that much about their enemy. In fact, it was sort of by our design that we wanted the enemy to be faceless, to be a non-human, a non-anthropomorphic enemy. And here they find out the hard way that their intelligence isn't particularly good. And in a moment, we'll see what that does to the fleet.
It's nice that the commander here, the officer, tells them that they should just remember their training and they will make it back alive. Well, that's what he says, and of course it's a lie, isn't it? Because most of them won't make it back alive. And it's one of the propaganda tools, again, of this kind of government that they have that tells you that everything will be fine, and ultimately, of course, will be not.
That's what the military has to do, ultimately, to do their job. They have to sort of lie to you and say, you could make it through this, because otherwise no one would go into war.
This is very complex shots here that you see. This is all, again, all kind of different elements, and I thought it was a really great job they did there in having these two ships getting together and breaking up, and the plates falling to other sides and explosions. I thought it was a magnificent look that they gave these ships. I think when we started the movie, when I started to talk to Scott Anderson, I felt that it was really important that the ships should all have an enormous amount of weight, and that they should not look like, let's say, fast-moving spaceships like you see in a lot of movies, but they should be like enormous tankers on the ocean, like the Queen Mary hitting the Titanic or something like that. That was the feeling that I asked Scott to bring into his vision, and he did in the most magnificent way. Back now here, at least on the planet, this is Clandatu, the home planet of the insects, and we see, like in a Normandy version, because a lot of these shots are taken from the documentaries that were shot when the Allies landed in Normandy. A lot of that is copied here. And you see our heroes who are running around and moving towards the enemy, knowing for sure that everything will be fine. And for some time, it still looks like that. Here you see now in the movie, in fact, for the first time, although you saw some of that in the beginning, of course, the enormous difference that is there between the humans and these gigantic insects here. These ones being called plasma bugs, and certainly being as big as a church or something like that.
50. I think we figured that those were 50 feet tall.
Right.
This is Hell's Half Acre in Wyoming, where we shot most of the battle scenes. And here are the tactical nukes. In this military world, you can use nukes, and they're not particularly dirty or something, because they seem to not hurt our soldiers as they blow over their heads here.
So till here, it seemed all to be fine, and then in the next couple of scenes, you find out, of course, that the enemy is extremely ferocious, and that a lot of the people that we have introduced in boot camp won't survive it and will stay behind on the battlefield. And it starts here with the killing off of Lieutenant Willie. Now here you have, for the first, you see the warriors in a very precise way. You can study them, and this is all extremely great work done by Phil Tippett and his company. Hundreds of people that worked on these bugs to make them as realistic as possible. We shot all these scenes, of course, without any of these insects around. They were all added digitally. So all the actors had continuously to act as if there was something right in front of them that was threatening and dangerous and that would run towards them. But of course, there was nothing there. And the only thing that we could do, Phil and I, is to be the bugs, to yell and scream and run towards them in the rehearsal, so they could have getting some feeling of what was going on. Me, of course, screaming like, "Ah! Ah!" The insects that you see here grabbing Shushumi and killing him, when you see a real contact between not this shot, this is a Phil Tippett shot, but when you see a real contact shots between, like this one, this is a mechanical bug that it was done by ADI under the supervision of Alan Gillis. Of course, here you go back to Phil Tippett's bugs that kill Shushumi in a kind of a pretty unpleasant way. But once in a while, especially when it is about contact between man and enemy, like later in the scene with the commentator when he gets grabbed and thrown around, that is a mechanical bug that has the real size of the bugs that we created. This is done in the studio. This little part where Katrina is grabbed by a bug, and here we are back to reality of Wyoming, where the troops are now retreating because they have realized a little bit late that there was a problem that they hadn't counted on.
We had a big problem here with Dale Dye, the military advisor, because he really didn't think soldiers, our soldiers, American soldiers, would ever retreat. He hated the idea that they would retreat, and I think he would have changed the script in some way, or maybe this was a tactical rearward advance.
Well, of course, in a lot of battles, military have to retreat. You know, I mean, in fact, often not retreating is a big problem, and I think a lot of the mistakes in the Second World War were based on at least on the German side was made by Adolf Hitler, who refused to retreat and lost all his troops. So I think retreating is a tactical movement that is when necessary is the best way to go. And of course, they still lose a lot of people, but I think they were really not prepared for this fight, and they will come back. That's what it is, isn't it?
So what we're saying, it's good when the bad guys don't retreat, but sometimes the good guys should retreat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You look at this scenes that's happening now. This is, of course, is digital. This is Phil Tippett. But at a certain moment, you should even look at that shot where Kitten Smith is cut in two and thrown towards us. That's digital. That's a digital Kitten Smith. What falls on the ground is real, but what was thrown to the air was digital.
And for those of you with a jog shuttle or can look at that in slow motion, you will see that the digital Kitten Smith is actually screaming as he flies through the air towards his friend Johnny.
And again, here, this stays digital till there's only one moment of reality when a part like this is a part of reality, when Johnny takes that jaw out of his leg, and the rest again is back to digital Phil Tippett work, like the shots here.
Now here's where we try to convince the audience that the hero really gets killed. I don't know if we did it or not, but it sure is a cool sequence. And
there he goes.
oh, this is the morning Federal Network, the black and white.
Yeah, we tried to give it a certain color every time that there was a FetNet to give its own color, like we did in the one before, which was flames, and this one is like, what's a funeral card, isn't it?
Yeah. This was actually the first image I ever wrote on this, was the image of insects and men dead together on the ground.
Again, here we're trying to be very extremely gender neutral, isn't it? And even ethnically neutral. The white male is replaced by a non-white female.
The weak white male is produced by the replaced by the strong.
And this is to experts that, like you see them many times on television, tell you a lot of things, but of course don't inform you about anything. Because that's probably their task, to be not too clear, because then you would guess that this war might not be something you really want.
This was Paul's idea, actually. I wrote it, but this was Paul's idea, and I think it's a great idea.
Also, the woman hitting the guy with her feet was probably something that happened on the set, really.
Yep.
I don't think that was in the script or even in my ideas. This shot is done by ILM, and the whole sequence, outside sequence, when the spaceships arrive close to the approach the battle station, is all ILM again. So we went to another group to do this scene.
The spaceships turned out to be a much bigger job than anybody had anticipated. But I think we got very lucky.
So this was shot again with blue screen, and then you see the outside, that was all added later. Again with multiple layers, like a layer of the battle station, and a layer of the spaceships that you see, a layer of the flames that you see, a layer of the smoke that you see, a layer of the planet that you see. Here another layer on the foreground that was added. So there's a lot of layers, one on top of each other, that you can do now very well because of the digital compositing. If you would have done that in an optical way, say 10 years ago, it would have nearly been impossible or really impossible to add 50, 100, or sometimes 150 layers on top of each other and still have a decent image. Now with the digital world in the computer, you can do it. So although the shots are done with a real camera, part of that, the flames are shot with a real camera, and the spaceships are, and the battle station is, all models of course, then they all translated into the digital world. They get in the computer, and in the computer these different things that were shot at different times are all put together, and then when that's all done and it looks kind of good, then you translate it again back to a negative that is ultimately, of course, the movie that you see. I mean, of course, as a positive, but that's how it is done, that process. This shot is done by Peter Goran with a digital wound that is made of Johnny there. There is Johnny's real leg is taken away. There was a real leg there, and it was replaced by a non-real leg where the wound is added in a digital way. For the rest, Johnny is really, of course, in the water and needs some oxygen, which we gave him.
I think he had to shoot this scene for 3 days in the water.
Yeah,
pretty awful, and it was a hard job for him.
And the camera is always, with the exception of one shot, the camera is always underwater, inside the water, close to Johnny, or looking to Johnny or to the other way. So it's always with a layer of water on the foreground because the camera is not outside the tank.
Well, the war goes on here. This is on to the next planet, which is Tango Urilla. And if you notice, there are little fighter jets there on the decks of the plane, a new military element that we're going to see in use soon. And here are the three friends reunited, and they are going off to join a new unit. And that brings us to a character that we met before, who's going to come back in.
Yeah, which is the character of Ratchak, of course, that we have introduced in the first real scene of the movie in the classroom. And the only thing we did is, where he has no hand in that scene that was probably cut off in another war, we now gave him an artificial hand so that he could be able to use his gun.
Although I think many people, when they see the hand, thought that we were bringing that the recruiting sergeant back in.
That's true, also because if the camera goes up, we see him later when you see the hand first, and then you see the camera goes up, and even from behind, because he has
he's bald.
Not much. Yeah, he's kind of bald. You can think that it is the sergeant that was, but then you ask yourself, how is he walking so well? But
it's a nice misdirection. It gives you a moment of surprise for
Yeah.
the Ratchik entrance, and which is about here. Here's the shot we're talking about. And this is Michael Ironside at his finest. There he is, looking grim, ready to kill some more bugs.
the idea was that after the complete defeat in Klandatu, where basically the morale is very low, that by bringing this kind of ultra, perhaps you want to call it a right-wing officer into the play again, you get the feeling that this guy knows what war is about, and this guy knows what's necessary to survive. And now, with Ratchak in charge, Johnny and the people that are with Johnny will be able to take a good stand and probably survive the war.
You could also say that this is the return of the good father. The former officer who led them to defeat being the bad father or the weak father. This is the strong father. And here's a wonderful sequence done by Phil Tippett. All shot in Utah. No, where was this?
Yeah, this was in South Dakota.
South Dakota.
And the planes that are coming there are miniatures done by Sony ImageWorks. The explosions are on the set, so the only thing we had there was a real explosion. No planes and no insects. These explosions are done by John Richardson, special effect coordinator. And that's all real, but then of course the elements of the insects were added later.
John Richardson had always wanted to do that effect. It's the longest rolling explosion in special effects history. I think it was a mile long. It was so long we couldn't even use all of it, but I think John was able to fulfill a lifetime dream.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great explosion.
It's a beautiful explosion. This is the planet. Tango Urilla was always sort of referred to as the zoo planet.
The
by
zoo
us.
planet and the positive
And
a
the- and
positive
where they win.
Yeah, this is where they win and where things seem to be going well. Of course, in the next phase of the movie, it goes bad again. But at the moment, it looks like there is some feeling of strength and that they are not afraid of the bugs anymore. They know how to handle them now, and they just kill them.
Which is what they're going to do here for the next little while, I think.
This location in South Dakota is adjacent to national park, the Badlands, and it's exactly the same terrain. Only, of course, in these national parks you cannot do these kind of explosions because that's forbidden. And so we had to find something that was similar. But there was in private property, and ultimately we found a farmer that owned these kind of
Also Badlands.
badlands, but that were he could do whatever he wanted there, and allowed us to shoot the whole scene there.
And actually, I don't think we really did that much damage because the rains come and change these things dramatically.
Much
from
more
month
than
to
basically whatever explosion, you know, because the ground there is really kind of softish, and it looks hard, but it is, and when it rains or when you step on it, you sink into it, and it's kind of a soft sand,
So
really.
clay, sandy, and it often vehicles would get stuck and really stuck 2 or 3 feet down.
The tunnel we made there artificially, that little tunnel that's inside there. I mean, when you look inside the tunnel, that's a digital effect because we had no inside, we only had an opening, and we added that. And this is all real stuff that John Richardson did, with the bugs, of course, added later.
And now it's time to meet a new bug, the tanker bug, which is what happens in this sequence. And if you look down here, you see something is coming up out of the ground.
Yeah, that was again an on-the-set effect done by John Richardson, who had built a hole underneath that, and with a whole hydraulic system could raise the ground. Later, of course, when you see the tanker bug coming out of the ground, in a couple of shots you will see that. Then this is all digital with some foam, real foam, miniature foam that was added to that, dust that was added, etc. But the whole thing, everything you see is done in an artificial way, digitally mostly. So there is there were no real holes in the ground here.
John Richardson also built the top of the tanker bug on the back of a tractor, didn't he?
Yes, yeah. Basically, when Johnny later in the scene, when Johnny jumps on top of the tanker bug and stands there, we had the tractor with the shields of the bug over it, and we were running around. Can you see it there? This is, of course, is Johnny with a digital tanker bug, and he jumps on top of that. This is digital, and this is real. Now he stands on the real stuff, but what you see there in the background, the little head, was added later. This, of course, is a digital. In the long shots, this is real, but in the long shots, if you look at Johnny, then Johnny is digital in the next shot. That's a digital Johnny and a digital bug. This is a real Johnny, and this is, again, digital, real, digital Johnny, a real Johnny, etc. You can see the whole scene is based on these going from reality to a digital Johnny.
This is kind of a
Digital, real.
it's an amazing sequence.
Real.
Many shots.
Digital, real, digital, Johnny real. That was a big stunt that they did.
There was another Verhoeven working on this picture. In fact, Helen Verhoeven, Paul's daughter, did this shot coming up right here, among many others. She worked her way up to the top.
Yeah, she did the compositing of
the
the
compositing of that shot, which is, in compositing, is, in my understanding, is sort of the...
It's the final phase,
final phase,
yeah,
and
that you
also
got-
one of the finer arts of,
Yeah.
of CG.
Yeah, where you get all these things together, all the different elements. But of course, compositing is important, and but you should not forget that basically it all starts with the animation, and that the animators, a lot of them, do extremely difficult work that takes a long time really to adjust, so that you feel that the movement of these animals are real. And as these were animals that don't exist, you don't even know how the skeleton is like with the dinosaurs. You won't know. You had to find it out all yourself how to do it.
Well, this is a scene we shot at Vasquez Rocks, which is actually in Southern California, which had to be matched to look like we were still in South Dakota. This is a party scene. I remember the night we shot it, Paul said, "I think this is the most romantic scene I've shot since Soldier of Orange."
Well, I mostly refer to the scene that you'll see a little bit later between Johnny and Dizzy when they get together, as she says, isn't it? And that's, I think, is romantic in the way it's shot, but it's also one of the few movies I remember that where I have had somebody telling his partner that he loves her, or that she loves him. In this case, it's Dizzy telling Johnny that she loves him. And note, of course, in that scene, that Johnny has a difficulty in reacting to that. I mean, you would expect him to say, "I love you too," but you see at his face that he cannot get it out of his mouth.
Now, in this scene, we show that race relations are quite good because, in fact, what we have is African-American soldiers and white soldiers dancing to the tune Dixie. And in the background here, we will see that Ace, who plays the violin, is going to serenade these guys. And another Verhoeven worked on movie here, Martine Verhoeven, who is an excellent violinist, worked with with Jake Busey, the actor who played Ace, for many, many hours and was able to teach him. And he is actually playing this violin here.
Yeah, I think he's nicely in sync, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, Jake turned out to have some musical abilities and could kind of pick up a lot of instruments and do well. But he practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced for this moment here. He plays for his friends. And this song that he plays is La
Golondrina, which is a
Golondrina.
reference to movies by, I think by Ford, but certainly by Sam Peckinpah. We used it in The Wild Bunch.
a movie which both Paul and I like a good deal. Well, there was the violin right there. And so now we get into the romantic part here. Dizzy has finally gotten her guy. It's been a long time in coming, but she's stuck in there, and now she's going to get what she deserves.
This was done while we were rained out in Wyoming. We needed we couldn't shoot anymore, and so we set again this tent up in the warehouse, which was a very unromantic atmosphere to work. And because we were on a night schedule, we had also to do it at night. Here you have a little sadomasochistic moment in the scene where Dizzy is kind of. Her eyes are covered so she cannot see what's happening. It's very light, but there is a little reference to that, of course, which still makes it a movie, a scene that belongs to a movie that has my signature.
Yeah, not
say
usually
that.
a sort of scene you would see in a movie about fighting giant bugs. It's true.
Well, it's always nice to break the genre, you know, to go really to do this kind of for real. And this is the scene I'm talking about, or I talked about before, when Dizzy looks at Johnny and then tells him that she loves him, and then look at Johnny's face. Here she says it.
I love you, Johnny.
But Johnny,
Boy.
you know, he wants to sleep with her, but he's not sure that he loves her.
And nobody wanted him to die because of that. So it's clearly a double standard going on with the audience here. Yep. And here we have the biggest laugh, I think, in the whole movie. And credit for this must go to Paul Verhoeven, who actually told me to put in this line where he says, you can take 30 minutes. And that got a huge laugh. I didn't think it would get that big of a laugh, but it really did. There you go.
It's basically confirms what the Washington Post wrote about me when the film came out, the notoriously perverted director Paul Verhoeven.
And I think, Paul, you could say that you're kind of proud of that review, aren't you?
I thought it was a pretty disgusting review here, to be honest, because it accused us of neo-Nazism.
Yeah, well, they didn't. That was kind of interesting
It
to me.
seemed to miss the point that basically the movie was
Yeah.
about fascism in our own society.
I was disappointed by that one in particular because I'd grown up thinking the Washington Post was the coolest, smartest newspaper, except for maybe the New York Times. And indeed, they missed the point entirely and seemed to want to jump only on the PC bandwagon. I think that...
You know that the whole press, according to Chomsky, anyhow, is really rallying behind the government, whatever it says, to the left or to the right, for the Democrats or Republicans.
Yeah, I
know?
would love to
They
know...
call it freedom of press, but of course there is a censored freedom of press. Everybody censors himself.
Yeah, this movie was made with Chomsky's ideas about media in mind. But I think that back to the, oops, here's a hopper. We haven't seen hoppers yet. But while we're waiting for the hopper to kill this guy, we'll talk about the Post. Now, the Washington Post, I think, has a notion, or at least the fellow who wrote that article, that there is only certain prescribed ways that you can talk about themes like fascism, or only certain ways you can present these things. And if you walk outside those lines, then you are in trouble. Then, in fact, you are sort of, as they charged us, supporting fascism.
Yeah,
Which is not the case at all.
Although it was more a subversive statement about government of superpowers in general, I think, than anything else.
But that's what's disappointing about the Post not getting it, because you'd think they'd be smart enough to get the
Or
subversive
they got it very
statement.
well and didn't want to hear it.
But why would they?
That's-
In the 60s, they were in the 70s, they were one of the most subversive newspapers
Yeah,
around.
but they changed their mind a little bit.
So
didn't
now
they?
they've become the establishment, which
Yeah,
sort
they
of,
do,
which
like the
sort
Rolling
of-
Stones. I mean, not the group, but the magazine.
Which, yeah, they didn't like the movie either. But that does sort of support
So
Chomsky's view
everybody
of
that didn't
media.
like the movie is bad, in my opinion.
Well, actually, I think we should go and say that they're actually fascists.
Well, that's pretty close.
Now, this is the first day of principal photography. Right there, that boom shot of the fort and this running across was the first day that we went to Wyoming, and it was a terrible, awful, awful day because we'd been wanting to do this for so long, and suddenly we had to do it.
Yeah,
And
it was-
I remember nobody was very happy. I think Paul looked white with fear as he ventured off to start this. This is the heart of sequence in the movie, the fortress sequence that we're coming up on here. And we had to start with it first because of the long lead time that the special effects, that Phil Tippett special effects needed for this. Here's some bodies by Kevin Yeager. And if you look closely, you actually see that some of these bodies are Kevin Yeager. In Kevin Yeager as a girl, Kevin Yeager as an African American, but a lot of those had to come out for the MPAA.
And the fortress that you see here was built right on that location by Alan Cameron. It was a gigantic thing to do, and it took them a couple of months to do it. But it's all what you see is real. There is no special effects here, and the tents and everything there were added to that so that we could also shoot the interiors at the location. This was all shot, as you see, because the shot goes from the outside straight into the inside, was done really... with the exception of this scene, because there's a big hole in the floor here that, of course, could not be buried, that could not be made on the location because the ground was too hard. So that scene, what you just saw, was done. That part of the scene was done in the studio later. We built it on a platform so we could make a hole in the ground.
Now here's coming up here is one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and it has to do with they find a cowardly general who is hidden out while his command has been slaughtered by the bugs.
Oh, wait a moment, you forget the scene that is my favorite scene.
Okay, well, you talk about
where,
your
where he puts his metal finger into the head of the guy and then tells the audience that bugs went into his head.
Now, this is a
and
pretty perverse
They
moment
sucked
here.
his brains out.
Maybe the Post was right about you. Ugh. Actually, it's a very good line right here. They sucked his
His
brains out.
brains out. I mean, of course, it's clear that this should not be taken completely seriously, and this has a kind of a over-the-top, hyperbolic.
This is almost farce here with this.
Yeah,
general
it goes
coming
on
out.
and on, isn't it? With the guy jumping out of the, and officer on deck.
Nobody got that joke.
Grab up
Officer
the
on the
ga-
deck. My goodness.
grab the general, bring him up.
Now, the idea of this scene was that essentially it's the old Pogo line of we have met the enemy and he is us. And later on, this general will say, "Don't you get it? They're just like we are. They want to know us so they can kill us." And I think actually the studio was very happy with that rewrite because that was added later on. And I think they were happy with it because I think they thought this put the needed element of self-loathing into movies because, as we know right now, you know, if you make a movie about the Army, you have to be a little self-loathing about it.
To make you do things. They made Farley call headquarters.
Here is what you talked about, isn't it?
Yes, this is the scene. Also, they realize it's a trap,
Makes us tick. They want to know us. So
and they know what that means. Something bad's going to happen.
And now basically we are going to the scene that, like Ed said before, I think, and everybody saw was probably the most difficult scene to shoot, which was the attack by these hundreds and hundreds of warriors that run towards the fortress, while every shot, of course, every second shot is a digital shot made by Phil Tippett later, but while the actors, of course, when they had to do the scene, had nothing in front of them and had to envision the whole scene without having the enemy there. And because there are so many shots and they are so fast and close together, to be sure that the choreography of the bugs was correct was, in my opinion, extremely difficult. To keep the continuity there, to know that the bug would move as far in this shot and then that far in the next shot and then would fall on the ground in the third shot, that was extremely complex. And I think the only way that we could master that problem, I think we did, was by choreographing in the storyboards in a very extensive way everything that happened in the scene.
Yeah.
And using the storyboards really as the Bible, and when we started shooting, never deviating anymore from the storyboard. Just say, this is what we thought 3 months ago, let's shoot it. You know, even could be different, we cannot do it anymore. Let's just shoot it as we storyboarded it.
Yeah, I think Paul probably did this sequence before we got to Wyoming. He storyboarded it 3 times through, and when we got to Wyoming, we went through it a few more times to take shots out and change the order around. It was the last major rewrite of the production was on this sequence. And I remember we had the assistant director, Greg Goldstone, made charts which had all the storyboards on them, and every day at the end of production, they would gladly cross out the storyboards that they had shot.
Greg had made these storyboards in a certain way that he had colored them all as different colors, so that you would see exactly blue was Phil Tippett, green was Kevin Yeager, and etc., so that you could read the storyboards and everybody could see in the morning what we're going to do. I brought everybody in my trailer every morning for a half an hour. The complete special effect unit, my excellent second unit director Vic Armstrong, we just did the Bond movie, and Phil Tippett, of course, Kevin Yeager, whoever was necessary, Scott Anderson, and we would all sit there like in a military meeting, like a briefing, and would tell each other what we thought that the scene, what was the difficulty of the scene, how we would solve it, etc. And then we would all spread out over the set and go our own way. Me jumping around from first unit to second unit all the time, and Vic coming towards my unit to help me when it was too difficult.
Yeah, often we would have 3 cameras going in at one time, 3 different units working. There's an interesting story here, which I'm going to interrupt when we come to the big shot, because I think you should probably tell them how complicated it is. But people were worried when we were shooting in Wyoming because of the environmental damage we might do to this wonderful place called Hell's Half Acre. And in fact, it was an Indian area, perhaps even an Indian burial ground, which made it even more sacred. But it turns out that this canyon was used by the Indians to kill buffalo. They would essentially stampede them off the cliffs so that they fell to their deaths here. And I think they probably did a lot more environmental damage in those days than we were. Anyway, here's the shot.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most complicated shots for Phil Tippett to get all these bugs there, one behind the other, you know. It took forever, I think, to get that. And there's, I think, 1,000 bugs in that one shot.
1,000 bugs, he says, in one shot. I think it was 60 hours to render that or something.
Right, yeah,
very,
well,
very
to bring
long.
it from the to bring it out of the computer onto the negative, really.
Right. Which is a very, very long time. Now we have the soldiers retreating from the walls. This is a scene that's pretty much inspired by movies like Gunga Din and Beau Jest, the old Fortress movies.
Charge of the Light Brigade.
And Charge of the, well, we looked at Charge of the Light Brigade, and those shots of the bugs falling, which we called the falling horses shots, were added in Wyoming with Phil
While we were shooting,
while we were shooting, because we watched the Charge of the Light Brigade. But very often when the fort is being overrun, you have to leave the walls and go down here. And this is getting pretty desperate here. They're holding out, hoping for rescue. Oh, here's Crazy Bug.
Yeah, the fact that you just saw with the lights flaring into the camera, of course, that was added later again in a digital way.
Crazy Bug was put in to set you up for something that happens later on, because we wanted to make sure you knew that occasionally a warrior would be in lurking about in the compound.
This again is a model that was done by Sony ImageWorks. This again is everything is digital, nearly there, with the bugs. And then the spaceships are models that were added to the shot.
These shots had to be shared between Sony ImageWorks and Phil Tippett's company.
Yeah, they went back and forward because they have both elements in it. So Phil would work on the shot and then would go back to Sony, and they would add elements and then go back to him. This was done by John Richardson. This is really, this is just a hole that was made there underneath, and that basically would break away. And all these elements are done by air compression and stuff like that. So that's a kind of a real scene. The body that they just pull up in a moment was done by Kevin Yeager without the... there you go, that shot there, you just saw it. This is real, this is... Michael Ironsides was the legs hidden behind underneath the ground, but the shot before you saw, that was a shot that was just a dummy, basically, that looked like Michael Ironsides.
This is the sort of death of the father here, and this we always thought this meant that Johnny was grown up now. And it's interesting, we didn't intend it, but it's interesting. The moment he shoots him, this big giant thing comes out of the ground.
Yeah,
it's
like a
mythological.
Freudian mythological.
We should say, actually, because of Time, for Time magazine, we should say we knew what we were doing and we meant it, whatever it means. And here, Dizzy saves the day, with because of course she knows how to throw a football and
yeah, and
be very
then
accurate with
there
that
follows a
grenade.
moment that a lot of people, I think, seeing the movie regretted that it happened, isn't it? That Dizzy. This is the wrong girl dying, as it has been mentioned by some people.
Yeah, but you know, in war, I think that
It's more real, you know,
Paul
because
and I both felt
that's
that
what we felt that.
in war your friends die. Now in Platoon, it's okay if your friends die because that's Oliver Stone or that's serious. But I guess in these sort of entertainments, you're not supposed to kill off the hero's girlfriend.
Well, the question is basically if it is straight entertainment or not, you know, and that might be doubtful because it takes it. Sometimes it really goes beyond what is comfortable and pleasant, I think. And that's probably a moment that a lot of people had problems with because it's so, yeah, it's not what you want in a movie. It's not what makes you feel good when you get out.
But I think that we were trying to be truthful about the nature of war in a war picture. We were trying to say the nature of a war picture
This is digital, sorry that to interrupt you,
Yeah.
but the wall there that is broken apart is digital, made by Phil Tippett. And then later, of course, this blowing, of course, that these flames are also all digital additions to the shot that is anyhow mostly digital in the first place. And this is a combination of the foreground by Phil and the background of that ship that was Scott Anderson. And the tower that you saw falling there is the real tower that we just made fall on the ground. This is probably another one of the most complex shots with all these layers of bugs and tanker bugs and warriors and everything else. And I think that's another shot that took them I think 4 or 5 months to even to get it in the computer nearly.
Now, the death of Dizzy was filmed on a gimbal platform on a green screen stage back in Los Angeles.
Yeah, green
many
screen
months
for
later.
as far as the cockpit goes, in it, because here you don't have green screen. But when Xander walks to the cockpit, that's all. Was a green screen set, but it was on a gimbal, so you would add the movement of the ground, so that it would be rocking and that it would be very disbalanced the whole scene. That adding a feeling of anguish to the dying of her.
And a feeling of nausea to the actors who had to do it.
Especially her last line, I think, is from a philosophical point of view, I think is very interesting because she says, really desperately, she says, Johnny, don't let me go. She doesn't want to fall into the abyss of death, basically, which is also not a very pleasant way of thinking about death. But we felt that that it might be the case that way, you know, that it might be the reality of our life ultimately.
Now, this is where we thought that the audience would like seeing the Johnny and Carmen get back together again, because of course we presented them as the boy and the girl of the picture, and you assume they're going to get back together. But because of the difficulties we had with Carmen, we didn't get that reaction. And in fact, there was a scene that we deleted, I think it's part of the special footage that's included on this disc, that came after this, where Carmen and Xander discuss, well, what does this really mean? And do you love him or do you love me? And the audience in previews really didn't like her for that. They thought
Because she said,
awful.
I don't know.
Yeah, she said, I don't know. I guess if we had done it properly, she should have broken down and apologized and maybe gone groveling back to Johnny. But we didn't do that. We just cut the scene out. And coming up next is the Washington Post's favorite scene, I think, and maybe the scene that caused us the most trouble in the press, which is when the character of Carl reappears in the story.
Yeah, because we put Carl, in this kind of dark black Nazi, or you could say, as uniform, indicating, of course, that we disagreed with Carl, that we didn't stand behind him, that we thought that he was on the wrong side of morality. And I think somehow people seem not to see it that way. But if you listen to what Carl is saying in the scene, which is basically we don't care how many people die as long as we get where we want to be. It's all about numbers, you know. It's not about friendship. And if you survive, fine. If you die, and he means even Carmen and Johnny, well, too bad, you know.
Carl has become a biological fact. He's become like an insect here. He's not thinking in terms of human emotion anymore. He's thinking in terms of numbers, and any number can be sacrificed if it's for the greater good.
Yeah, to a certain degree, we were inspired for some time when Ed was writing by a character in Dr. Zhivago called Strelnikov, which is, I think, Tom Courtenay, who is an idealist in the beginning and becomes the ultra, let's say, harsh, rude, insensitive, nearly communist that is willing to sacrifice everything for everybody.
And even his own life at the end.
Right.
At the end. Yeah, for American viewers, Neil Patrick Harris was known as a character on television in a show called Doogie Howser, in which he played a very innocent, very sweet young man. And I thought this was very appropriate that character should be turned into a fascist. And I think that this scene proves the theme of the movie, that war turns everybody into a fascist, that innocence dies in war.
And you even see here that Johnny and Carmen disagree with Carl. You know, they say, but he seems not to mind that. Even if they express their disgust about the fact that they were sacrificed without knowing, sacrificed without having much of a chance. You know, that Dizzy apparently died because Carl thought it was interesting to find out if there was any evidence of a brain bug, without, of course, telling them that they were going to be sacrificed. All that basically is against Carl, and is basically us saying we disagree with Carl. It's difficult, perhaps, to accept in a movie that the people that are your bosses, that are your government, that are supposed to be taking care of you, ultimately don't take care of you and care only about a war that might not have been necessary in the first place.
Yeah, it's a very sort of anti-entertainment movie move. In other words, he has been identified at the beginning as one of our heroes and one of our friends, and by this time in the script, or in the movie, we probably feel kind of ambivalent about him, and maybe the audience doesn't know how to take that. And I think that was our intention, for better or for worse, to sort of undercut the enjoyment there a little bit.
Yeah, and on top of that, of course, Johnny ultimately seems to agree with that whole position. I mean, at least accepts it as a fact of life.
Well, he's brainwashed.
Yeah, so because if Carl offers him a job as an officer, he says, oh, okay, I'll take it till you find somebody better or I'll die, you know? Well, he seems to be agreeing with the whole situation, which is also not completely comfortable, of course.
No, that was actually something, I think there were some books during World War I in Germany called Blood and Steel, in which it was argued that a soldier's duty was to die for his country and an officer's duty was to point his soldiers in the direction that they should die. And sadly, I think that that's what has become of our hero here. He's been completely brainwashed by the military. I always think this is a very sad scene because of the youth of the recruits.
Yeah, remember that scene of Adolf Hitler? The last shots that were ever made of him when he's standing outside the bunker. It's on his birthday, I think, and there's all the young people of the Hitler Jugend standing in front of them. They're 6, 7, 8 years old, and he walks along them and touches their cheek and gives them hands. I mean, that's the feeling, isn't it? I mean, and to be clear, it's bad.
Right.
It's not good. It's something that is bad.
That's entertainment, folks. Now, here we have the big spectacular sequence coming up here, what we call the wreck of the Roger Young. And this involved many, 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 many man-hours for Sony Imageworks.
So the shots through the window, again, are done in the same technique. It's a green screen, but then the creation from what you see outside, that was done as models later, and then all put together again through compositing. This is one of my favorite model shots here, when the pan along the ships and seeing all the disastrous destruction around them. I think that's extremely nicely shot and put together by Sony Imageworks. Again, here is a combination of shots through the window and a lot of special effects that are real. This is, of course, hundreds of layers again in that shot where you see the Roger Young breaking up. All the little flames that you see here are added separately. All these layers of the decks that you see there are added. So it has been extremely difficult to put these things together.
I was really pleased with this sequence because it was written pretty specifically, even down to describing the decks and the way the ships were moving in space and stuff like that. And I truly did not expect to see it. And later, Scott Anderson came up to me and said, you know, it's a lot easier to write those things than it is to do them. And I must say that's true. But he did a great job. One of the things that I didn't see in the press very much, which I think is pretty interesting about Paul, is that he grew up during World War II. In fact, he grew up in Holland, and he was there as the Nazis occupied Holland, and I think he has childhood memories of jackboots walking through the streets. Isn't that true?
Yeah, no, clear. And although, yeah, some of that, of course, of my use of fascist or Nazi visuals has to do with what I saw when we were occupied by the Germans, and which was a pretty bad time for about 5 years. But I think what's more interesting even here is that a lot of the visuals of the destruction of the Roger Young and of these spaceships in general were based on my observations when I was a young child. When I was about 5, 6, 7 years old, and we were living in The Hague, which was at the side of the North Sea, when the Allied squadrons would come over Holland because they were going to bomb the cities in Germany. But of course there was all kind of German artillery on the coast to try to hit these planes before they would move further inland. And I was living there, and you could see every night during the night you would see the fire of the artillery and the big planes that were hit by the artillery, by the shells, and they would start burning and go down in flames. And these shots, basically, these explosions and these flames that you would have in the sky, like a special effect nearly, at that time, of course, were full reality. And I think these kind of images that I remember, I think somehow when Ed wrote these stories, I projected these images into the stories. And I think a lot of the spaceship stuff that is more or less ending here now was based on memories that I had when I was a child. That's why it has this kind of visionary, kind of strange quality, I think, because it's, yes, it were no spaceships, but still, it were big Lancasters and all whatever planes they used, the Americans and the English. And growing up in that atmosphere has always given me a feeling that war is is something that I know very well about. You know, although I was not a soldier, I could see it very close up in my life.
Didn't you tell me once that you were eating breakfast or dinner with your parents and a bomb went off in the front yard?
Yeah, a bomb went off in the house that was opposite to us and blew all the whole window on our table. The glass, and so you were sitting eating your soup or whatever was there. This was in '44, so there was not much to eat anymore. We were eating very strange things that like tulip bulbs.
Tulip bulbs? You were eating,
yeah,
the Dutch were eating their own tulip bulbs? My God.
Yeah, that's because there was
were...
nothing anymore. Because the Allies had stopped at the rivers, and it was the bridge too far situation, that the south of Holland was liberated, but the north of Holland was still occupied, and we were living in the north. And there was no food because the Germans didn't care too much, of course, if the Dutch had food or not. They wanted their own food. So in that situation, that you would be sitting at the table eating tulip bulbs and then having the window blown on your plate because a bomb exploded. That kind of memories, I think, make me. I think are accountable for the fact that I express myself in war in a kind of what you would call perhaps direct or easy way, and also perhaps in a way that some people might think is pretty gruesome, because you saw these dead bodies all the time on the streets. You know, our whole area next to our house was bombed by mistake by the English, and thousands of people died, of course, and the bodies would be on the street.
So you were occupied by the Germans and bombed by the Allies.
Yeah, that was a mistake because
Yeah.
the English were supposed to hit the V1 and the V2 launching pads that were a mile from our house, and they reversed the map. The squadron leader reversed the map, and so he bombed the wrong area, which was the area that we. In fact, our street was saved because it was the first street that was saved. Yes, the whole miles around our house were all bombed. Yeah.
And these were the good guys too. But even
Yeah,
good guys
well-
make mistakes in war, I guess.
Yeah, enemy friendly fire they call that, isn't it? Well known from
Well,
from
they
the
talked
last
about it
war
Persian Gulf.
in Iraq.
The other thing I think is interesting about the tone of the way you've handled these scenes is, you know, you were a kid in the war. And I think you said something that as a kid, you know, you don't really think anything's going to happen to you until
No,
it does.
right.
And so I think there's a quality of that in here, that there's in a good way, a childlike quality. It is direct, it is unflinching, and yet there's a sense that nothing's really going to happen to you, the hero.
So we're back here into the caves anyhow, and that whole cave that you see around Carmen and Zender was built on the biggest stage that we have here at Sony. All in some foam stuff, and then of course painted and whatever. Johnny at this point is looking to go to a company, but here is paid off the situation with Carl, the telepathic situation, because somehow Johnny gets a message here. He doesn't know how he knows, like he says in the movie, but he gets a message from Carl in this case, who knows that Carmen is still alive, and directs Johnny towards Carmen.
So Carl turns out to be not quite as bad as we thought.
Well, there's a line in the movie that was taken out because of the movie being too long. But basically, in the end of the movie, when that's acknowledged or was acknowledged, Carl says, "Well, we need as many heroes as we can get," you know. So it's basically more out of opportunistic
Little more
reasons than that
pragmatic.
it is exactly because it was his
Maybe he
his-
was going
his-
to send
his
them on a
friend.
Bond tour or something like that to drum up support at home.
Yeah, that's the moment that Johnny says, I know how I don't know how I know, but I know. So this is supposed to be a telepathic moment. Later we see it again, of course, when Carl puts his hands on the brain bug and reads the mind of the brain bug, acknowledging that the brain bug is afraid. Then we get for the first time to the brain bug that was created by Craig Hayes, who did all the designs for all the animals in Phil Tippett Studios. He's a great art director and a visual supervisor, and he designed the warriors as well as the Tankerbergs, as well as this interesting monster. I would call it an evil god, nearly that's moving towards us, supported by all the little crazy chariot bugs that the red ones that are underneath him and are carrying the brain bug towards his position. If you look well, you see the little ones underneath there, and that's how it moves. It cannot walk itself anymore, the brain, because it's all brain, and it lost its legs. There are only some rudimentary legs left because he is only thinking, you know. And here we go for the idea that the brain bug gets more information by sucking out the brains of whatever, in this case of Zender, that would add the brain capacity to his own brain, which is nearly an old archaic way of thinking. But from a computer point of view, is it just taking out one chip and moving it into the main computer, isn't it?
Sort of bug interrogation. Here we go.
And so that's what we try to express. But I think the description as a god, but in this case an evil god with multiple eyes. Also, there were some remembrance that I had to the monsters that Lovecraft created. You know, this I call it I don't know how you pronounce it, Chulchu, the Chulchu god that is one of the main characters of the Lovecraft horror thinking. And I think some of that is also came into this monster.
Yeah, I think the point here was, again, not to make anything recognizably human, to make it very much the concept of the other, that thing that is not human, that has to be stopped or killed. And it's just about to kill Carmen, but luckily, well, there he is, Johnny to the rescue. And he's bringing a nuke in, and here's we sort of the only real communication, except that with Carl later on, between man and bug. And
yeah, because the brain bug seems to acknowledge, first of all, that Johnny has something very dangerous in his hand, and is also protesting in a kind of a spitting way, isn't it? That this is kind of unfair or something.
or watch out, guys. He at least has a sense to save himself.
Yeah, that's what it is about, isn't it? He doesn't want to go to suicide, and he has kind of a human thinking. I think the warriors don't care at all about dying or not. I think they don't even know about
They're
death.
the perfect.
You know?
I think that's a line in the movie. Actually,
Yeah.
they're the perfect soldiers. This is some of the best close fighting with bugs that Phil Tippett's people did. I think it's pretty amazing. Some of it. This shot here. Wow, look at that. Bugs and bugs and bugs.
But that's the difference, I think, between the brain bug, who has a sense of himself as something that is alive and can die, while the warriors are only, let's say, programmed. You would say, are biologically programmed to defend and or in fact to be aggressive and kill. And if they are killed in the process, they don't know, you know.
No, they will. Well, actually, we did a lot of bug research on this, or insect research on this, and that is how life as an insect is. You will sacrifice yourself for the colony, and they don't care.
And
There's
he,
no
as
sense of
sugar,
that.
sacrifices himself for his friends.
A valiant death.
This whole effect that we now have with the explosion is mostly real. There's a little bit digital manipulation here, but these are big explosions. Like this is real, with fire that are pursuing our heroes and comes very close. I mean, of course, the point was that John Ritchie did it in a way that it was just safe, but it looks pretty dangerous because it's real, isn't it? It's fire that follows them. It's not. The people are not added, like often is done nowadays, are not added digitally to the fire. The people are there and the fire is there at the same time.
Now we come up on what is the sort of the end of the movie, the second to the last sequence, really, of the movie, and it's the capture of the brain bug. What I find interesting here is that many people feel sorry for this thing. Now, we've just seen it kill one of our heroes and suck his brains out. He is, in fact, the leader of the enemy, but because he has been captured, and because maybe he's an animal or something, we start to feel sorry for him. This I did not think would happen, but indeed, some people have expressed to me that they're sorry for him, and that someone even said that he felt that the humans were bad when they cheered because it was afraid. But another friend of mine from Texas, of course, when he heard that, said, "God damn right it's afraid," just like every other enemy of the United States of America should be and is. But that's Texas for you.
Well, that's politics, isn't it? And we didn't want to talk about politics in this conversation, isn't it?
No, there's Dale Dye. That was the military advisor there in a Nazi uniform. I mean, a uniform that has...
This is done by, the close shots are done by ADI, by Alec Gillis and his group, and the wide shots are done by Phil Tippett. So this is real, what he holds in his hand, and whatever is close-up, that is a real thing they created with moving eyes and moving tentacles and all that, with 10, 15 puppeteers inside the bug. But if it's a wider shot like that, then it's again Phil Tippett.
Carl, hey.
Whoa, look who's here. You made it. Good.
Now we have the big patriotic speech, and the big patriotic speech at the end of a movie in the World War II movies, well, every one of them had one. During World War II, each of the studios made these movies, and of course the war was not over when the movie was over, so there was a sense that they would go on and they would keep on fighting, and there was usually a character.
Yeah, you mean
like
movies that were made in 42, 43,
yeah, 42 and 43
yeah.
and 44, and they always kind of ended in an open-ended way. It was assumed that we would keep on fighting and win, and often they were talking about how it was necessary to sacrifice yourself, and it was kind of a good thing. It's always a point in a war where you have to tell your soldiers it's good to die, and that's probably the most creative thing that the military has to do is at some point
Convince
everybody that it's good to die. If you can do that, you can get a lot of good soldiers. And here we have the return of Zim, who's sort of the surrogate brother to Johnny. And the Johnny, being the younger brother, has now trumped the older brother and is over him in power.
Like you will see here, an element was taken out where Johnny and Carmen kiss each other that you will see in the additional material.
This is another scene that animal rights activists just really can't stand. It's some sort of testing they're doing on the brain bug, and because it looks painful, they feel sorry for this bug. They didn't like the scene.
The idea basically with this propaganda at the end is to tell you that although you have seen that 90% of the people that you liked have died, because not many survived, 3 or 4 of the 10 or 12 that you have been that were introduced throughout the movie, that it's still good to go forward, and that's why Johnny says here, come on you guys, basically you want to live forever, and he seems to have been completely indulged in this kind of military thinking by now, although in the beginning he was not too keen to go for it. But that's what happens to us all of us, I think, when there is a war going on and we feel that we are threatened for good or for right reasons, true or not true, we will ultimately think that it's more important to fight for the species than for ourselves.
Yeah, so come on, join up.
Now.